The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B hummed at exactly 60 hertz. It was a dirty sound, a low electrical grumble that most people tuned out. But I had spent 40 years making a living by listening to things other people ignored. I heard the hum. I heard the bailiff's leather belt creak as he shifted his weight by the door. I heard the vibrating buzz of a cell phone in a purse 2 rows back, muffled by leather and tissue packs. And I heard her. Deanna sat across the aisle at the petitioner's table. She wore a navy blazer she had bought specifically for this morning. I knew it was new because when she walked past me, I saw the price tag still tucked inside the collar. Details. You miss them when you are talking, but you catch everything when you are just listening. She gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard, her knuckles looked like polished white stones. Her breathing was shallow. 22 breaths per minute, I counted automatically. That is the frequency of panic. My son sat next to her. Brett. He was wearing the polo shirt from the Ford dealership where he worked, the one with the blue oval logo on the chest. His hands were in his lap. For the last 6 weeks, whenever the tension rose in a room, Brett would wring his hands together, a nervous tick that sounded like dry skin rasping against dry skin. But today, his hands were still. They lay flat on his thighs, heavy and motionless. Judge Carolyn Frick adjusted her reading glasses. She was a woman who wasted no time. She looked at Deanna's table, then at mine, and finally at the large flat-screen monitor that had been wheeled into the center of the room. "This is a contested guardianship hearing," Judge Frick said. Her voice was dry, no reverb. "Before we proceed with testimony, I have been presented with a motion from Respondent's Counsel to admit audio-visual evidence." My lawyer stood up. Arlo Flagg moved slower than most men his age, but he spoke with the weight of a freight train. "Your Honor, this compilation was gathered over a 5-week period by my client, Mr. Pruitt, in his capacity as a resident of the household." Deanna's lawyer shot up like a spring. "Objection, Your Honor. We have not had adequate time to review this material. My client has a right to privacy in her own home." Judge Frick looked over her glasses. "Indiana is a one-party consent state counselor. Mr. Pruitt lived in the home. He was present in the shared living spaces where these recordings took place. I've reviewed the chain of custody documentation. The evidence is admitted." She turned to Arlo. "You may proceed, Mr. Flagg." Arlo nodded to the bailiff. "Your Honor, before we hear testimony about my client's alleged confusion and incompetence, I think it is best if the court sees what my client heard." Judge Frick sat back. "Let us watch the family video." The word video landed in the quiet room like a dropped glass. I heard the change in Deanna's intake of breath instantly. A sharp hitch, a glottal stop. She turned to her lawyer and whispered something, and the frequency of that whisper was high, tight, and cornered. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested on the smooth wood of the defendant's table. For 67 years, I had been the man in the back room, the guy behind the mixing board, the invisible engineer making other people's voices clear. I adjusted levels. I removed static. I made sure the audience heard what mattered. Today, the voice they were about to hear was hers, and the audience was a judge with the power to sign my life away. The screen flickered to life. I didn't watch the monitor. I watched Deanna. I wanted to see her face when the first wave of sound hit her. I wanted to see the moment she realized that the old man she treated like furniture had been recording the broadcast of her life. Her lips parted. A sound escaped her throat, raw and unpolished. It was the beginning of a scream that she clamped down on before it could fully form. But I heard it. I heard the vibration of a wall coming down. I closed my eyes. The exhaustion hit me then, a physical weight pressing on my shoulders. It wasn't satisfaction. Not yet. It was just the heavy relief of finally setting down a burden I had carried in silence. 6 weeks ago, I was not sitting in a courtroom. I was lying on a kitchen floor. I was dying. I was reaching for a small orange plastic bottle that was only 3 feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. 6 weeks ago, a woman looked down at me and said 2 words that rearranged every molecule of who I was. But to understand the frequency of that moment, you have to understand the silence that came before it. You have to go back to the garage, to the cold concrete, to the morning. I was still just a ghost in my own house. My room was a converted garage on the north side of the house. The floor was concrete, covered by a thin rug that did nothing to stop the Indiana winter from seeping through my socks. It smelled of old motor oil and the lavender detergent Deanna used on the sheets, a combination that always made my nose itch. It was 6:30 on a Tuesday morning, week 0. I sat on the edge of my single bed. My hands moved slowly. I picked up my hearing aids from the nightstand. They were beige, ugly little things, standard issue from the VA. I turned them over in my palm. The truth was, I didn't need them as much as everyone thought I did. My hearing loss was mild, mostly in the upper registers, but the aids amplified everything. With them in, I could hear the furnace cycle on in the basement. I could hear the refrigerator compressor kick in from the kitchen. Without them, the world was soft, muffled, peaceful. I put them in anyway, slowly. I never rushed this part. It was part of the costume, the slow, fumbling old man. On the small table next to my bed sat a Sony cassette player from 2009. I pressed the play button. The mechanics clicked loud in the quiet room, a solid analog sound. Tape hiss filled the air. Then a voice. I feel so bad I've got a worried mind. Della, my wife. She was singing in our old kitchen 14 years ago. I'd recorded it on a Saturday morning while she was making pancakes. She was slightly flat on the high notes, and she missed the rhythm in the bridge, but the grain in her voice was warm and real. It was the only recording I had left where she wasn't talking about doctors or insurance. I closed my eyes and let the frequency of her voice wash over me. For 3 minutes, I wasn't a widower living in his son's garage. I was 45, the coffee was brewing, and Della was laughing because she had caught me holding the microphone. Bang, 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 the wall shook. Dad, turn that down. Some of us are trying to sleep, Deanna's voice. Muffled by the drywall, but the sharpness cut through. The spell broke. The kitchen vanished. Della vanished. I reached out and pressed stop. The click echoed. Sorry, I whispered to the empty room. I waited 10 minutes before going out. I had learned the rhythm of the house. Deanna needed her coffee before she could tolerate my presence, and Brett needed to be in the shower before I could use the hallway without being in the way. I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome by 18 months. When I finally walked into the kitchen, the air was thick with the smell of brewing coffee and burnt toast. The kitchen was open plan connected to the living room by a large island. It was modern gray and white with stainless steel appliances that beeped whenever you touched them. Deanna stood at the island, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. She wore her scrubs for the dental office pink and tight. Her hair was straightened brown with blonde highlights that looked sharp under the recessed lighting. Morning, Deanna, I said. She hummed something that wasn't quite a word. She tapped the screen of her phone, frowned, then tapped again. Is Brett up? I asked. In the shower, she said. Her voice was flat. No modulation. She wasn't talking to a person. She was talking to an appliance that was making a noise. I moved to the cabinet to get a mug. My movements were deliberate. I kept my head down. I was the invisible man. I poured my coffee and took it to the small table in the corner, away from the island, away from her space. Deanna's phone rang. She answered it on the second ring, her voice shifting instantly into a bright theatrical soprano. Hey, girl. No, I'm just getting ready. Honestly, it's been a morning already. She glanced at me. I was staring into my black coffee. I didn't move. I didn't react. To her, I was just a shape in a flannel shirt. She lowered her voice, but not much. She didn't think she needed to whisper. She thought the hearing aids were just decoration. Yeah, he's sitting right there. Honestly, Crystal, he doesn't even hear half of what we say. It's like talking to furniture. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter. I let it burn my tongue. Furniture. That was a new one. Usually I was the burden or the project. Furniture implied something useful. I didn't say anything. I just sat there and listened to the refrigerator hum at 120 hertz, waiting for my son to come out and start the day. That evening, the air in the house felt heavy. The barometer had dropped, pressing down on the roof. We were eating dinner meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Deanna's meatloaf was dense, heavy on the garlic to mask the lack of seasoning. The only sounds were the scrape of forks against ceramic plates. B flat, a harsh scratching frequency. In the living room, the TV was on. A game show. Canned laughter bubbled up every 30 seconds, peaking at 440 hertz. I cut a piece of meatloaf. My hand felt strange, heavy, like I was moving it through water. I looked at my fork. The metal seemed to vibrate. Brett was sitting across from me. He was scrolling on his phone, his face bathed in the blue light of the screen. He chewed rhythmically, eyes never leaving the device. Deanna was at the sink, her back to us, rinsing a pot. The water roared against the stainless steel. I took a breath, but the air didn't seem to reach the bottom of my lungs. It started as a tightness in the center of my chest. Not pain, not yet, just pressure. like someone had inflated a balloon inside my ribcage and refused to stop. Then the tingling started. It began in my fingertips, cold and prickly, and washed up my left arm in a wave. Wrist, elbow, shoulder. My fork clattered onto the plate. The sound was loud. Brett looked up, blinking. "Dad," I tried to speak, but my jaw felt locked. The pressure in my chest turned into a vice, a giant iron hand squeezing the life out of my heart. The room tilted. The white lights of the kitchen flared, burning holes in my vision. My hand went to my shirt pocket, the nitroglycerin. I always kept the small bottle there. Always. Since the first angina attack 4 years ago. My fingers fumbled with the fabric. The pocket was flat, empty. My heart hammered against my ribs in erratic, terrified drum solo. I patted the other pocket. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my gut. I looked at the kitchen counter. There. The orange prescription bottle. It was sitting next to the toaster, 6 feet away. I must have left it there after breakfast. I never did that. I was meticulous. But there it was. I tried to stand up. I needed to get to the counter. The chair legs scraped violently against the tile, screeching wood. My legs buckled. They just folded underneath me like wet cardboard. I went down. My knees hit the tile first, then my hands. I was on all fours, gasping for air that wouldn't come. I stared at the grout lines between the beige tiles. I focused on the gray grit of the grout. Dad Brett's voice was high, panicked. I heard footsteps. Deanna turned off the water. The sudden silence was deafening. "My pills," I wheezed. I lifted my right arm, pointing toward the counter. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Deanna walked over. I saw her shoes, pink sneakers with white soles. She stopped next to me. Brett was there too, hovering useless. His hands were wringing together. "Deanna, get his pills. He's having an attack." Deanna didn't move toward me. She moved toward the counter. She picked up the orange bottle. I looked up. From the floor, she looked enormous, a towering figure backlit by the recessed lights. Her face was in shadow, but I could see her eyes. They weren't panicked. They weren't scared. They were calculating. She held the bottle in her hand. She turned it over, looking at the label. "Give it to him," Brett shouted. He took a step toward her. "Hold on," Deanna said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "He needs his medication." Brett's voice cracked. "I said hold on, Brett," she snapped. The authority in her voice stopped him cold. He froze. His mouth snapped shut. He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. His hands squeezed each other, knuckles white. Deanna looked down at me. I was gasping, my chest burning like it was filled with broken glass. I reached out to her. "Please." She didn't hand me the bottle. She didn't call 911. She leaned down, just a little. She looked at me with an expression of mild distaste, like I was a stain on her clean floor that she hadn't gotten around to scrubbing yet. She smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small, tight, satisfied. "Gasp, loser." The words were whispered. 180 hertz, low. Controlled, intimate. Gasp, loser. She wasn't shouting. Shouting is for emotion. Whispering is for choices. My vision began to tunnel. The edges turned black. The pain in my chest was absolute now, a blinding white noise that drowned out the TV, the refrigerator, everything. I looked at Brett. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy who used to sit on my lap and listen to the world through headphones. He was standing 5 feet away. He was watching. His hands were wringing. He wasn't moving toward the phone. He wasn't moving toward the pills. He was just standing there, paralyzed by the woman holding the plastic bottle. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Deanna's shoes, pink and clean, and the last thing I heard was the sound of my own heart stuttering, trying to find a rhythm that was no longer there. Then silence. The sound returned before the light. A siren. 700 hertz rising and falling. A standard ambulance siren. It was close. Loud. I was moving. The floor was gone. I was on a stretcher. There was a mask over my face, forcing air into my lungs. I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the ambulance flashed past. A paramedic was leaning over me, adjusting an IV line. Something hard was pressed into my hand. I looked down. My fingers were curled around the orange pill bottle. Brett must have put it there. After Deanna walked away, after she finally let him call. He had put the pills in my hand to make it look right, to make it look like I had them all along. The paramedic saw me looking. "Stay with us, sir. We're almost there." I closed my eyes again. The siren wailed. I was alive. The realization was cold metallic. I was alive, but the man who had fallen on the kitchen floor was gone. The man who tried to be invisible, who tried to be furniture, who tried to keep the peace he had died on that tile. Something else had taken his place, something sharper, something that listened not just to hear but to record. Deanna thought I was just static, background noise. She was wrong. I was the frequency that was about to shatter the glass. Part 2. I woke up to the sound of my own heart being broadcast to the room. It was a steady, rhythmic beep, 72 beats per minute. I counted it automatically before I even opened my eyes. It was a habit from 3 decades in audio engineering. You always check the baseline frequency first. My chest felt bruised, a deep, dull ache behind the sternum where the doctors had done their work, but the rhythm was consistent. I opened my eyes. The room at St. Elizabeth Hospital was washed in gray morning light. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and that distinct metallic scent of industrial laundry. Brett was asleep in the visitor's chair. His chin was resting on his chest, his mouth slightly open. He looked younger when he slept, the lines of worry around his eyes smoothing out. For a second, he looked like the boy who used to fall asleep in the vocal booth while I finished a late-night mix. But Deanna was not asleep. She was standing at the foot of my bed speaking to a man in a white coat. Dr. Nolan. I recognized him from the emergency room. Deanna was performing. There was no other word for it. She stood with her posture slightly slumped, hands clasped over her heart. Her voice was pitched a full octave higher than her natural speaking register, a breathy, trembling vibrato that screamed devotion. "We have been so worried, doctor," she said. She let out a long, shaky exhale. "I mean, honestly, I told Brett weeks ago that we needed to get him checked out. He has been so confused lately, forgetting things, not eating right." I lay still. The sheets were scratchy against my legs. I watched Dr. Nolan nod sympathetically, making notes on his tablet. He was buying it. Why wouldn't he? She was the young, capable daughter-in-law taking care of the stubborn old widower. It was a story everyone knew, but you know how the elderly get? Deanna continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that carried perfectly to my ears. Stubborn. He insists he is fine even when he is clearly declining. I cleared my throat. The sound was dry like sandpaper on wood. Mr. Pruitt. Dr. Nolan said, turning to me with a professional smile. "Good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Better," I rasped. Deanna jumped in before I could take a second breath. "He says that, but honestly, doctor, at home he barely remembers to take his pills. It is a constant battle." "I remember," I said. My voice was stronger this time. I looked directly at her. Deanna let out a light tinkling laugh. She reached out and placed her hand on my forearm. Her fingers were cold. I felt them tighten just a fraction, a warning masquerading as comfort. "See? This is exactly what I mean," she said to the doctor, shaking her head affectionately. "He does not even realize he was not carrying them last night. He thinks he took them, but the bottle was on the counter." I felt the blood heat up in my neck. I wasn't carrying them because they weren't in my pocket. They weren't in my pocket because someone moved them. But I looked at Dr. Nolan's face, and I saw the way he was looking at me. He saw a 67-year-old man with gray hair and a heart condition. He saw a patient who had collapsed on a kitchen floor. He didn't see a witness. He saw a liability. If I argued now, if I accused her of hiding my medication, I would sound paranoid. I would sound exactly like the confused, declining old man she was describing. So I did the only thing I could do. I closed my mouth. I lay back against the pillow and let my eyes drift half shut. I watched Deanna through my eyelashes. I stopped listening to her words and started listening to her cadence. The micro pauses before she answered a question. The slight acceleration in pitch when she lied. Twice in 3 sentences she used the word honestly. "Honestly, doctor?" He says that, but honestly, it was a tell. A verbal tick. In audio editing, we call that a transient spike, a sudden burst of energy that signals a distortion. I watched her charm the doctor, watched her stroke my arm with her cold fingers, and I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not fight. Not here. I would fade. They kept me for 2 days. Observation, they called it. Deanna went to work. Brett went to the dealership. I was left alone with the hum of the ventilation system and a nurse named Gloria who smelled like peppermint and fatigue. I spent the hours counting ceiling tiles, 24 tiles across, 24 tiles down, 576 tiles total. It was a way to keep my mind sharp, a way to organize the chaos. I ran the scenarios in my head. Option A, I leave. I walk out of this hospital and go to a motel. I call a taxi, go to the bank, and disappear. Result. Deanna wins. She tells Brett I wandered off confused and dangerous. She files for emergency guardianship immediately. I lose my son. I lose the only family I have left. Option B. I tell Brett the truth. I tell him his wife stood over me and watched me gasp for air. Result, he doesn't believe me. Or worse, he believes me but is too weak to do anything about it. Deanna spins it as a hallucination brought on by hypoxia. The doctor backs her up. I end up in a psych ward. Option C, I go back to the house. I eat her food. I sleep in the garage. I become the furniture she thinks I am. Gloria came in to check my vitals on Thursday afternoon. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. Your daughter-in-law sure is attentive, Gloria said. She calls the nurses' station every few hours. She does, I asked. I kept my voice flat. Oh yes, she is very worried about your discharge plan, asking if we think you need a professional care assessment. My pulse skipped a beat. The monitor beeped a little faster. A care assessment. That was the first legal step toward guardianship. Della's mother had gone through it. It was the paper trail you needed to prove that someone could no longer make their own decisions. Deanna wasn't waiting. She was already building the file. She is very thorough, I said. Gloria smiled, oblivious. You're lucky to have family who cares that much. Most people in here just have a TV remote. I looked up at the 576 ceiling tiles. I thought about the equipment sitting in boxes in my garage. Microphones that could pick up a whisper at 50 feet. Recorders that captured audio at 96 kilohertz. I didn't need a motel. I needed a studio. I chose option C, Saturday night. Week 1. I was back in the house. The living room was washed in the flickering blue light of the 60-inch television. Brett was sprawled on the sofa watching college basketball. The volume was cranked up. The crowd noise was a wash of white noise around 2,000 hertz, punctuated by the squeak of sneakers on a court. I sat in my recliner in the corner. I had a book open on my lap, a thriller I had read 3 years ago. I hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. I was wearing my hearing aids. This was the variable Deanna didn't account for. She assumed that without the aids I was deaf. She assumed that with them I was barely functioning. The truth was, my hearing loss was selective. I had lost the high frequencies, the shimmer of cymbals, the chirp of crickets. But the mid-range, the range of the human voice, I could still hear it fine. The aids didn't just restore the highs, they amplified everything. They acted like a compressor on a mixing board, boosting the quiet sounds and leveling out the loud ones. With the aids in and the ambient noise of the TV masking the silence, I was effectively a surveillance device. Deanna was in the kitchen. The house was an open concept, the kind that was popular in the early 2000s. No wall separated the kitchen from the living room, just a large granite island. She was standing at that island maybe 12 feet away from my chair. She was chopping vegetables. The knife hit the cutting board with a sharp, rhythmic thwack. She was on her phone. She wasn't whispering. Why would she? The TV was loud. The old man in the corner was reading a book. He was harmless. He was confused. He was furniture. No, Crystal, listen, Deanna said. Her voice cut through the basketball commentary like a knife. The hospital visit was perfect. The doctor already wrote cognitive concern in the notes because of what I told him. I stared at the word protocol on page 42 of my book. I breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. 14 breaths per minute. Keep the heart rate steady. There was a pause while Crystal spoke on the other end. Then Deanna laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. 6 months. Girl, try 3. I already have the guardianship forms printed. Once I file, the court sets a hearing. Once I am his legal guardian, I control everything. The pension, the Social Security, the house. My fingers gripped the edges of the book. The paper felt dry and brittle. 3 months. She was giving me 90 days before she erased me. Another pause. Deanna stopped chopping. She leaned against the counter. His house. Oh, it is in probate limbo. Della's name was on it too, and this dumbass never updated the title after she died. Once I have guardianship, I petition to sell as his fiduciary. Brett won't fight me, she snorted, a sound of pure derision. Brett does not fight anything. That is why I married him. The crowd on the TV roared as someone scored a 3-pointer. Brett clapped his hands, cheering. Dad. Did you see that? Brett yelled over his shoulder. I looked up. I adjusted my glasses. I forced a confused smile onto my face. What I asked, who scored? Brett shook his head, turning back to the screen. Never mind, Dad. In the kitchen, Deanna covered the mouthpiece of her phone. She looked at me with a sweet, pitying smile. You okay, Dad? Need some water? I'm fine, Deanna, I said. Just reading. She nodded and turned back to her chopping, back to her callback to plotting the demolition of my life. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear, from a cold, hard rage that felt like ice water in my veins. Dumbass, that is why I married him. She had made a mistake, a fatal acoustic error. She assumed the signal-to-noise ratio in this room was in her favor. She thought the TV drowned her out. She forgot who she was talking to. I closed the book. I stood up slowly, groaning a little for effect. I'm going to turn in, I said. Night, Dad. Brett called out without looking away from the game. Sleep tight, Deanna said. I walked past the kitchen island. I could smell her body spray, that cloying vanilla scent. I walked down the short hallway to the garage door. I opened it and stepped into the cool, quiet air of my room. I locked the door. I sat on the bed and looked at the stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. The ones Deanna called junk. The ones she wanted to donate to Goodwill. I knelt down. My knees cracked, but I didn't care. I pulled the top flap open. Inside, nestled in dark gray foam, was my Zoom H6 handy recorder. It looked like a piece of alien technology, black sleek with a large XY microphone capsule mounted on top. Next to it were coiled XLR cables and two lavalier microphones, each one no bigger than a shirt button. I picked up the recorder. It was heavy, solid. I pressed the power button. The small LCD screen glowed to life. The red standby light blinked at me. I put on the headphones. The world narrowed down to the sound of the room tone, the hum of the furnace, the faint murmur of the TV through the wall. I adjusted the gain on channel 1. I watched the levels dance on the screen. Green, yellow. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a fighter. I was an old man with a bad heart and a son who couldn't stand up for himself. But I knew how to capture a signal. I picked up one of the lavalier mics and rolled the tiny black capsule between my thumb and forefinger. It was small enough to hide in a collar, small enough to clip under a table ledge, small enough to be invisible. Deanna wanted a broadcast. I would give her one. I hit the record button. Testing, I whispered. 1, 2, testing. The bars on the screen jumped. The recording had begun. Part 3. The walk to downtown Lafayette took 40 minutes. It used to take me 20. I told Deanna I was going for a stroll. Just getting some air, I said. Doctor's orders. She barely looked up from her iPad at the kitchen island. She just waved a hand, a gesture that meant go away as much as it meant goodbye. Don't overdo it, Dad, she called out. Her voice was light, unconcerned. She liked it when I wandered. It fit her narrative. The confused old man shuffling aimlessly around the neighborhood. The air was biting. February in Indiana is not kind to old bones or damaged hearts. The wind cut through my flannel jacket, finding the spaces between the buttons. I kept my head down, watching the cracks in the sidewalk, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. I needed to calibrate myself. Willa's studio was tucked into a converted storefront on Main Street, wedged between a failing antique shop and a bakery that smelled of yeast and sugar. The sign on the glass was peeling Gold Leaf Carnes audio production. I pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead. The smell hit me first. Stale coffee, old vinyl, and the warm, distinct scent of overheating tube amplifiers. It was the smell of my entire adult life. Willa was behind the glass partition of the main booth. She was wearing a bright orange scarf that looked like it could strangle a bear, and she was shouting into a talkback microphone. No, Terry, you are popping your peas. Back off the mic. 3 inches. She looked up, saw me standing in the doorway. Her mouth stopped moving. She took her finger off the talkback button. She didn't smile. Willa Carnes didn't do polite smiles. She marched out of the booth, slammed the heavy soundproof door behind her, and stood there with her hands on her hips. She looked me up and down, inspecting the gray in my skin the way my clothes hung loose on my frame. You look like hammered shit, Norm, she said. Nice to see you too, Willa, I said. She pointed a finger at my chest. 18 months. 18 months without a phone call, without a text. Della would rise from her grave and kill you herself if she saw you right now. Della would kill a lot of people right now, I said. The anger drained out of Willa's face instantly. She knew me too well. She heard the frequency in my voice, the flat, dead tone that meant I wasn't joking. She walked over to the coffee station, poured a mug of black sludge that had probably been sitting there since dawn, and shoved it into my hand. "Sit," she ordered. "Tell me." I sat on the worn leather sofa that had absorbed the nervous sweat of 1,000 local podcast guests. I held the warm mug with both hands to stop them from shaking, and I told her. I told her about the kitchen floor. I told her about the pills. I told her about the look on Deanna's face when she held the bottle and whispered those 2 words. "Gasp, loser." Willa didn't gasp. She didn't cover her mouth in horror. She sat in her swivel chair perfectly still, watching me with eyes that were dark and dangerous. She was a producer. She was used to hearing bad stories. Her job wasn't to react. It was to fix the mix. When I finished, silence filled the room. The only sound was the hum of her server rack in the corner. So Willa said. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. "She stood there and watched you die." "She watched me almost die," I corrected. "Same thing to a judge," Willa said. She spun her chair around, picked up a pen and clicked it against the desk. Click, 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 that sound, a metronome of thought. "You can't go to the police," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have no proof," I said. "It is my word against hers. She has the doctor. She has Brett." Brett. Willa spat the name out like a piece of bad gristle. "That boy. I remember when he used to sit right there on that rug in color while we edited the 5 o'clock news. How did he get so weak?" "He isn't weak," I said, though I knew it was a lie. "He's just captured." Willa looked at me, hard. "So what are you doing here, Norm? You didn't walk 40 minutes in the cold just to catch up." "I need your studio," I said. "What for?" "I need to check out some equipment." Willa raised an eyebrow. "You have your own gear?" "I know you do. You have that Zoom unit and those Sennheiser labs you stole from the station when you retired." I smiled. It was a thin smile, but it felt real. "Borrowed, Willa. Permanently borrowed. I have them," I said, "but I need cables, I need batteries, and I need a place to offload files if my laptop gets compromised." Willa leaned forward. Her eyes searched mine. She wasn't looking for fear, she was looking for resolve. "What is the plan, Norm?" That question. 4 words. Not "are you okay?" Not "you should leave." She asked me for the schematic. "I'm going to record her," I said. "I'm going to stay in that house. I am going to let her think I am a senile old man who talks to furniture, and I am going to get every single thing she says on tape." Willa stared at me for a long beat, then slowly the corners of her mouth turned up. "Indiana is a one-party consent state," she said. "I know," I said. "I have to be in the room." Willa stood up. She walked over to a metal cabinet in the corner and pulled it open. She started tossing things onto the sofa next to me. A box of high-end lithium batteries, a bundle of shielded XLR cables, a thumb drive with an encryption key. "Don't miss," she said. "I won't." The next afternoon, I went to work. My room was the only place in the house where I had true privacy, mostly because Deanna refused to enter it unless she was snooping. The concrete floor kept the temperature 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house, which suited me fine. Cold air is better for equipment. I opened the cardboard box in the corner again. I took out the Zoom H6 recorder. I laid it on the bedspread like a surgeon laying out instruments. Then I took out the lavalier microphones. They were tiny. The capsules were the size of a black peppercorn attached to thin, durable wires. I had 2 of them. Professional grade, the kind news anchors wear, the kind that can pick up a heartbeat if you tape them close enough to the chest. I took my favorite flannel shirt, a faded red and gray plaid that I wore 3 days a week. It was soft, thick, and invisible. Old men wear flannel. It is part of the uniform. I threaded the wire of the first microphone through the inside of the shirt. I pushed the tiny capsule up through the buttonhole of the second button from the top just below the collarbone. The plaid pattern camouflaged the black dot perfectly. Unless you were looking for it, unless you were 6 inches away and staring at my chest, you would never see it. I slipped the recorder into the inside pocket of the heavy cardigan I wore over the shirt. I plugged the wire in. I taped the excess cable to the inside of the flannel so it wouldn't rustle when I moved. I put the headphones on. I stood in front of the small mirror on the back of the door. I looked at the old man in the glass. Gray hair thinning, glasses slightly crooked, shoulders slumped. "Testing," I murmured. The sound in the headphones was crisp, full. I heard the fabric of my shirt settling. I heard my own breathing. I walked to the door. I listened. The house was quiet. Deanna was at work. Brett was at the dealership. I spent the next hour mapping the acoustics of the house. I walked from the garage to the kitchen. I sat in my recliner. I sat at the dining table. I learned exactly how I needed to sit to minimize clothing rustle. I learned that if I leaned my left elbow on the table, the mic picked up conversations from the kitchen island perfectly. I learned that if I slumped in the recliner, the collar of my shirt opened just enough to create a direct line of sight for the mic to the rest of the room. I was calibrating myself to be a walking receiver. Thursday night, week 2. This was the first real test. Dinner was soup, chicken noodle canned. Deanna didn't like to cook on Thursdays. We sat at the round dining table. The setup was intimate, too intimate. Deanna sat at the 12 o'clock position, Brett at 3 o'clock. I was at 6 o'clock directly across from her. The Zoom recorder was in my cardigan pocket running. The red light was taped over with black electrical tape so it wouldn't glow through the fabric. The mic was live at my collarbone. I ate slowly. I made a show of it. My hand shook a little as I lifted the spoon, a calculated tremor. I slurped slightly. It was a disgusting sound, wet and sloppy. Deanna grimaced. She looked at Brett and rolled her eyes. I saw it. I didn't react. I just wiped my mouth with a napkin and stared vacantly at the salt shaker. So, Deanna said, buttering a roll with aggressive strokes. I talked to the lawyer today. Brett looked up from his bowl. Yeah, what did he say? He says the paperwork is almost ready, she said. She didn't lower her voice. She spoke in her normal register, clear and sharp. To her, I was just a fixture in the room, a radio that was turned off. I took another spoonful of soup. Slurp. Deanna didn't even look at me. She leaned in toward Brett. Once I file the petition, the court assigns a hearing within 30 days. It moves fast. Brett shifted in his chair. He looked uncomfortable. 30 days. That seems quick. Are we sure he's ready for that? Deanna laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Brett looked at him. She gestured toward me with her butter knife. He is eating soup like a toddler. He won't even understand what is happening. We are doing this for his own good. Someone has to protect the assets. I chewed a piece of soggy carrot. I stared at the table, keeping my expression blank, slack-jawed. Inside, my mind was racing checking levels. Her voice is direct, no reverb, good signal-to-noise ratio. The spoon sound is a bit loud. I need to time my eating between her sentences. But Dad, Brett started. But nothing. Deanna snapped. She dropped the knife onto her plate. Clatter. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want the state to take his pension to pay for some state-run facility? Or do you want us to handle it? Brett looked down at his soup. He mumbled something I couldn't hear. What? Deanna asked. I said, okay, Brett whispered. Good, Deanna said. She picked up her water glass. Honestly, it is going to be a relief. Once I have the power of attorney, we can finally stop worrying about money. I finished my soup. I pushed the bowl away. That was good, thank you, I said. My voice was raspy, weak. Deanna smiled at me. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It stopped at her teeth. You are welcome, Dad. I'm glad you liked it. I stood up, shuffling my feet. I'm going to rest my eyes. I walked back to my room. The hallway seemed longer than usual. My heart was pounding, a heavy thudding against my ribs that the microphone surely picked up. I locked the door. I sat on the bed and pulled the recorder out of my pocket. I stopped the recording. I plugged the USB cable into my laptop. I opened the file. The waveform appeared on the screen, a jagged blue mountain range of sound. I put on my headphones and pressed play. He won't even understand what is happening. Her voice filled my ears. Crystal clear, digital stereo, high fidelity. Honestly, it is going to be a relief. I saved the file. I sat back in the dark. The blue light of the laptop screen illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I had her. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a confession. She had admitted to the timeline. She had admitted to the motivation. And she had done it while I sat 3 feet away eating chicken noodle soup. I looked at the waveform again. It was beautiful. Sharp peaks, deep valleys. It was the shape of truth. One recording. It was a start. But I knew it wasn't enough. A lawyer like hers could argue context, could argue frustration. I needed more. I needed the pattern. I needed the cruelty. I reached for my calendar on the wall. I marked the date with a red X. The collection had begun. Part 4. The days blurred into a gray loop of static and signal. For the next 2 weeks, I ceased to be a father or a widower. I became a recording device wrapped in flannel. I lived my life in 6-hour shifts governed by the battery life of the Zoom recorder and the capacity of my SD cards. I ate when they ate. I sat where they sat. I became a ghost that haunted the furniture of my own life, always present, always silent, and always running tape. We called it the collection phase. It was a strange kind of game. Deanna moved through the house with the confidence of a woman who believes she is the only player on the board. She didn't know the pieces were watching her. Recording number 3 happened on a Tuesday. I was in the recliner, the newspaper spread open on my lap. I hadn't turned a page in 40 minutes. The hearing aids were in tune to the mid-range. Deanna was in the kitchen pacing. I could hear the slap of her bare feet on the hardwood. She was on the phone with Crystal again. Crystal was her sounding board, her accomplice in spirit, if not in law. "I cannot wait to get the new car," Deanna said. Her voice carried over the kitchen island, bouncing off the granite countertops. "Brett's pension from Ford is not much, honestly. It barely covers the mortgage. But Norm's Social Security plus the VA supplement." She paused, listening. Then she laughed. "Exactly. That is $3,400 a month I can redirect. It is just sitting in his account. He doesn't spend it. He wears the same 3 shirts and eats soup. It is wasteful." I stared at the headline of the local paper. "Local school board debates budget." My finger traced the black ink. $3,400. That was the money Della and I had saved for travel. For the RV trip to the Grand Canyon we never took. Now it was a monthly allowance for a new SUV. I didn't move. I let the recorder in my pocket drink it all in. Recording number 7 was the dinner table. Thursday. I had perfected the art of the old man nap. I sat at the table after the meal was cleared, my chin dropped to my chest, my breathing heavy and rhythmic. I wasn't asleep. I was focusing on the acoustic reflection off the dining room wall. Deanna and Brett were still sitting there. "Your father is declining," Deanna said. Her voice was low, serious, the tone of a concerned caregiver. "Anyone can see that. He left the milk out again this morning. I hadn't left the milk out. She had." "I don't know," Brett said. He sounded tired. The scraping of his thumbnail against the wood table gave him away. "He seems okay sometimes. He asked me about the game yesterday." Deanna sighed. A long, suffering sound. "You don't know. That is the problem. You're at work all day. You don't see him staring at the wall. You don't see the confusion. We would be negligent not to take over his affairs." "Negligent, Brett. Do you want that on your conscience?" There was a silence. Then the sound of a chair pushing back. "You are right," Brett whispered. "I know you are right. That is why I let you handle things." I kept my eyes closed. I felt a tear leak out hot and traitorous. I let it slide into the collar of my shirt right where the microphone was hiding. Recording number 12 was the car. We were driving to the cardiologist for my follow-up. Deanna was driving. I sat in the back seat of her Toyota Highlander, staring out the window at the gray Indiana slush. I had my head against the glass, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. To her, I was asleep. She was on the phone with someone from her dental office. The Bluetooth system in the car was loud, but she had switched it to handset mode so I wouldn't hear the other person. She didn't think she needed to hide her own voice. "Yeah, I'm taking him now," she said, glancing in the rearview mirror. I saw her eyes flick over me, then dismiss me. "Between the house equity and his retirement accounts, we are looking at close to $400,000. She turned the steering wheel, merging onto the highway. The turn signal clicked. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The man has no idea what he is worth. Honestly, it is sad. He is just sitting on a pile of cash while we struggle to pay for daycare. It is just resource redistribution. Resource redistribution. I saved that file the moment we got home. My laptop was filling up. My heart was hardening. But audio was only half the picture. Audio proved intent. Audio proved character. But in a court of law, audio needed paper to give it weight. I needed the documents. Saturday of week 3 offered an opening. Brett needed new tires for the truck, and Deanna wanted to go to the mall in Indianapolis. It was an all-day trip. They asked if I wanted to come. I told them my legs were aching. I told them I just wanted to watch old movies. Deanna looked relieved. "Make sure you lock the door if you nap, Dad," she said. The moment their taillights disappeared around the corner, the clock started. I moved through the silent house. I didn't rush. Rushing makes you careless, and carelessness leaves traces. I went straight to the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. Deanna called it her home office. It was the only room in the house she kept locked. I stood in the hallway and looked at the door frame. I remembered the sound. 3 days ago, I had been sitting in the living room, apparently dozing. I heard Deanna walk to this door. I heard her pause. I heard the scuff slide of fingers exploring the top of the wooden trim. Then the jingle of a key. Then the click of the lock. People are creatures of habit. They hide things in places that feel clever to them, but usually they are just convenient. I reached up to the top of the doorframe. My fingers brushed through dust until they hit cold metal. The key. I pulled it down. It was a small brass key, probably for a diary or a filing cabinet, but she used it for the doorknob. I inserted it. It turned with a smooth, satisfying thunk. I stepped inside. The room smelled of her, vanilla and stale paper. There was a white desk, immaculate, a laptop stand, and in the corner, a beige metal filing cabinet. I didn't touch the desk. I went for the cabinet. It wasn't locked. Arrogance. She locked the room so she didn't feel the need to lock the cabinet. I opened the top drawer, hanging folders color-coded. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I was in the zone. I flipped through the tabs: taxes, mortgage, medical. I found a folder labeled Pruitt, legal. I opened it. Inside was a thick stack of papers. The top document was a petition for guardianship of an incapacitated adult. I looked at the date stamp on the draft. October 14th. My heart stopped. October 14th was 2 weeks before my heart attack. She hadn't reacted to a medical emergency. She had been planning this when I was still driving myself to the grocery store. The heart attack wasn't the cause. It was just the accelerant. I photographed the document, every page. I kept digging. I found bank statements, transfers from our joint account, the one I used for groceries, into an account under just her name. 200 here, 500 there, testing the waters. Then I reached the back of the drawer. There was a folder there that looked older than the others. The tab was handwritten in blue ink. Langston, Deanna's maiden name. I pulled it out. It was thin. Inside, there was a death certificate. Earl Thomas Langston, date of death 5 years ago, cause of death, myocardial infarction, heart attack. Behind that was a copy of a last will and testament. It was short. I, Earl Langston, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all prior wills. Leave my entire estate, real and personal, to my granddaughter, Deanna Langston. The date on the will was 3 months before he died. There was one more thing. A letter from a lawyer in Terre Haute. Re-estate settlement. Dear Ms. Langston, per your instructions, the sale of the residence has been expedited. The house was sold 6 weeks after the funeral. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law wanting a new car. This was a pattern. I photographed the death certificate, the will, the letter. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I aligned the edges of the papers. I closed the drawer. I wiped the handle with the hem of my shirt to remove prints. I locked the door and put the key back on the frame. I went back to my room and sat in the dark. I looked at the photos on my phone screen. Earl Langston, a name I barely knew, a man who died of a heart attack alone in a house with his granddaughter. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the garage floor. I wasn't just fighting a thief, I was fighting a predator. Monday morning, week 3. I told Deanna I was going to the library. She didn't care. I met Willa on the corner of 4th and Main. She led me to a brick building with a faded awning. We walked up a narrow flight of stairs that smelled of floor wax and old cigars. The frosted glass door said, Arlo Flagg, Attorney at Law. Arlo's office was small, cluttered, and reassuringly messy. Stacks of files teetered on every surface. A framed law degree from Indiana University hung crookedly on the wall next to a faded photo of a platoon in desert fatigues. Arlo sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war. He was a man made of sharp angles and wire. He had a buzz cut that was growing out gray and eyes that looked like they had seen everything twice and weren't impressed either time. He was drinking coffee from a mug that said, World's Okayest Lawyer. Norm Willa said, This is Arlo. He hates everyone, but he hates bullies the most. Arlo didn't smile. He pointed to a wooden chair. Sit. I sat. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled out my laptop and the thumb drive. I laid it out for him. Not the emotional story, the technical one. I have 12 audio recordings, I said. All time-stamped, all original files, no edits, just noise reduction for clarity. I have chain of custody logs for each one. I verified the one-party consent statute. I was physically present in the shared living space for every single recording. I opened the folder on my screen. Here are photographs of the guardianship petition she drafted 2 weeks before my medical event. Here are the bank transfers. And here is a file on her grandfather, Earl Langston, who died 5 years ago under similar circumstances. Arlo leaned back in his chair. The springs squeaked. He looked at the laptop, then at me. He picked up a pen and tapped it against his chin. How many recordings, he asked. His voice was gravel. 12, I said. So far. You logged the location and time for each one. Yes, including ambient noise conditions and my physical position in the room relative to the subject. Arlo stared at me. You have done this before. 9 years as a forensic audio analyst for the Tippecanoe County Police Department, I said. Before that, 30 years in radio. Arlo cracked a smile. It transformed his face, making him look 10 years younger. Well, shit, he said softly. They picked the wrong old man. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. He started writing fast. Here is the situation, Norm. The guardianship petition she filed is a loaded gun, but we can jam it. The fact that it is dated before your heart attack is gold. It proves premeditation. It proves she was planning to declare you incompetent before you actually had a medical reason to be. He looked up. The recordings are admissible. If you were in the room, you are a party to the conversation. But the Langston stuff, that is tricky. That is a different jurisdiction. We can't use it as direct evidence of a crime against you, but we can introduce it to establish a pattern of behavior. He leaned forward, his elbows on the messy desk. I will take the case. We will file a counter petition. We will report the financial transfers to Adult Protective Services, but I need you to do something for me, and you are not going to like it. What I asked. I need you to go back to that house, Arlo said. My stomach turned over. If you leave now, he continued. She wins the narrative. She tells the judge you wandered off. She tells the judge you are confused and erratic. It strengthens her claim that you need a guardian. We need you there. We need you rational, calm, and present. He pointed his pen at me. And we need her comfortable. We need her feeling safe. When people feel safe, they talk. I want you to go back there and be the sweetest, most confused old man in Indiana. I want you to make her think she has already won. I thought about the kitchen, the soup, the way she looked at me like I was a piece of furniture. I can do that, I said. Arlo nodded. Good. Because the hearing is in 3 weeks, we are going to let her walk into that courtroom thinking she is coming for a coronation. He stood up and offered me a hand. His grip was dry and strong. Keep the recorder running, Norm, and for God's sake, don't eat anything she prepares if you can help it. I walked out of his office and into the cold sun. I felt lighter. I had a weapon now. I had a strategy. I walked back to the house that was no longer a home. I unlocked the door. Hey, Dad, Deanna called from the living room. You were gone a long time. Did you get lost? I walked into the room. She was watching a reality show. I smiled my vacuous furniture smile. A little, I said. But I found my way back. She didn't even look away from the screen. Good for you, Dad. I went to my room. I checked the battery on the Zoom recorder. Full charge. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for night to fall. The hunter was home. The folder labeled Langston sat on Willa's desk like an unexploded bomb. It was Tuesday of week 4. I had brought the photographs on my phone to the studio and Willa had printed them out. Now the paper copies were spread across her mixing console, covering the sliders and knobs. Willa typed furiously on her keyboard. The blue light of the monitors reflected in her glasses. She was digging. Here it is, she said. Her voice was tight. Terre Haute Tribune Star. Obituaries archives. I leaned over her shoulder. The screen showed a scanned newspaper page from 5 years ago. There was a grainy black and white photo of a man. He had a kind face, a receding hairline, and he was wearing a plaid shirt that looked a lot like the one I was wearing right now. Earl Thomas Langston, I read aloud. 74, passed away unexpectedly at his home. Unexpectedly, Willa repeated. She scrolled down. Survived by his loving granddaughter, Deanna Langston. No other immediate family. 74 is young, Willa said. She clicked a new tab. She typed into a real estate aggregator site. She filtered for sold properties in Terre Haute 5 years ago. She found it in 30 seconds. The house was a small bungalow on Sycamore Street, vinyl siding, a porch that needed painting, listed for sale. October 12th, Willa said. I looked at the obituary date again. August 28th. She listed the house 6 weeks after he died, I said. Willa clicked on the property history. Sold in November. Cash offer. Quick close. She spun around in her chair to face me. The timeline matches Norm. It is the exact same playbook. Isolate the elderly relative. Wait for a medical event. Take control of the estate. Liquidate the assets. Move on. I looked at Earl's face on the screen again. He looked like a man who liked to fish, a man who probably sat in a recliner and watched TV while his granddaughter made him soup. "Keep digging," I said. Willa went to a community forum, an old message board for the neighborhood. She searched for Earl's name. She found a post from a woman named Martha, a neighbor. "So sad to hear about Earl," the post read. "He was such a sweet man. I tried to bring him a casserole last week, but that granddaughter of his wouldn't let me pass the door. Said he was too sick for visitors. He deserved better than dying alone with only that girl there." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, settling in the base of my neck. Dying alone with only that girl there. Just like I had been on the kitchen floor. The only difference was that I had reached for the pills and my heart had decided to keep beating. Earl hadn't been so lucky, or maybe Deanna had been more thorough that time. "We are not just dealing with a thief," Willa said softly. She looked at me, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Norm, you cannot go back there." "I have to," I said. She grabbed my arm. "She is dangerous. This is not a guardianship case anymore. This is, God, Norm, this is serial behavior. That is why I have to go back," I said. I looked at the photo of Earl Langston one last time. I memorized his face. I owed him that much. If I don't stop her, I said, there will be a third old man, and a fourth. I gathered the papers. I put them back in the folder. I felt a new weight in my chest, but it wasn't my heart. It was the weight of a ghost hitching a ride. "I'm going home, Willa. I have a recording to catch. Friday night, 9 o'clock. The house was quiet, settled into the heavy, drowsy rhythm of the weekend. I was in my recliner in the living room. My eyes were closed. My mouth was slightly open, mimicking the slack-jawed sleep of the medicated. A hardcover book rose and fell on my chest with every breath. But under the flannel collar of my shirt, the red light of the lavalier microphone was covered with tape, and the membrane was vibrating, capturing every molecule of sound in the room. Brett was asleep on the sofa. He had passed out halfway through a sitcom rerun. His head was thrown back and he was snoring. It was a jagged, irregular sound, obstructive sleep apnea. He would snore, choke silence, and then gasp. Snore, choke, silence, gasp. It was a rhythm I could edit out later. I had the frequency filters ready in my head. The TV was on low. A laugh track bubbled up at 400 hertz, canned hysteria from dead people. Deanna was in the kitchen. Because of the open floor plan, she was only 14 feet away from me. I could see her through the slit of my eyelids. She was sitting at the island, a glass of wine in front of her. She was watching Brett. She waited. She waited for his snoring to deepen, hitting the delta wave rhythm that meant he was truly out. Then she picked up her phone. She didn't dial. She accepted an incoming FaceTime call. She propped the phone up against the fruit bowl. "Hey," she whispered. But it wasn't a quiet whisper. It was the projected stage whisper she used when she wanted to be heard but wanted to maintain the illusion of secrecy. I tightened my grip on the remote control hidden under the blanket. My thumb hovered over the volume down button. If the TV got too loud, I would lower it. Just a notch, just enough to keep her voice clear. She was talking to Crystal, again. "I'm telling you, Chris." "We are on track," Deanna said. She took a sip of wine. "The hearing is set for 2 weeks. Brett signed the supporting statement tonight." I heard Crystal's tinny voice from the phone speaker, but I couldn't make out the words. Deanna laughed. "He thinks it is to help Dad. He honestly believes we are doing this to manage his medication schedule." She glanced over at Brett. He let out a long, rattling snore. She looked at me. I kept my breathing steady. 14 breaths per minute, the rhythm of the deep sleeper. Scared, Deanna asked, responding to Crystal. "Girl of what? Look at him." She waved her hand in my direction. "He is a deaf old man who talks to his dead wife's tape recorder. The judge will take one look at him and stamp the papers. He drools when he eats soup." I didn't drool. I had staged that for her benefit. It was working. Crystal said something else. Deanna swirled her wine. "No, the heart thing was... Honestly, it was a gift." My heart hammered against the book on my chest. A gift. "A medical event plus documented confusion equals fast-track guardianship," she recited like she was reading from a manual. "Indiana law is very clear. If he cannot manage his own health, the court appoints a fiduciary." She paused. She took a long drink. The silence stretched. The refrigerator hummed. Brett snorted. Then she lowered her voice. The timbre changed. It dropped into a lower register, stripped of the performance, stripped of the pretense. This was the real voice. "Last time was easy," she said. I stopped breathing. I forced my lungs to hold the air. I needed absolute silence from my own body. Pop didn't even fight it, she said. He just faded. Pop. Earl Langston. I heard the ghost of Earl in the room with us. I heard the silence of his house on Sycamore Street. This one is a little more stubborn, Deanna said, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. But give it time. She swiped at her phone screen. I figure 6 months after guardianship we sell his house. The market is hot right now. We move the pension into an account I control. And we start looking at that place in Carmel I showed you. Crystal asked a question. Yeah, Deanna answered. He can go to Autumn Ridge. It is cheap. They take Medicaid once the assets are drained. She laughed again. Girl, by this time next year we will be in a 4-bedroom in Carmel and Norm Pruitt will be eating Jell-O in a nursing home wondering what happened. Brett shifted on the couch. He groaned in his sleep. Deanna's eyes snapped to him. She froze. I froze. Brett settled back down. The snoring resumed. Deanna exhaled. Okay, I gotta go. He is stirring. Love you. Bye. She tapped the phone. She finished her wine in one gulp. She walked past me, leaving a trail of vanilla scent in her wake. She went down the hall to the master bedroom and closed the door. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. When I was sure she wasn't coming back, I opened my eyes. The room was the same. The TV was still playing the sitcom. Brett was still snoring. But the world had tilted on its axis. Last time was easy. Pop didn't even fight it. She had confessed. Not to a crime, maybe not in the way a lawyer would define it yet, but she had confessed to the pattern. She had admitted that Earl Langston wasn't a tragedy. He was a practice run. I stood up. My legs felt solid. The trembling was gone. I walked to my room. I didn't shuffle. I moved with the silent precision of a predator. I sat at my desk and plugged the recorder into the laptop. I watched the file transfer. The blue bar crawled across the screen. I opened the waveform. I put on my studio monitors, the big headphones that blocked out the world. I isolated the track. I applied a high-pass filter to cut the rumble of the furnace. I applied a noise gate to snap silence between her words. I used a parametric equalizer to dip the frequency of the TV laugh track. Her voice emerged from the noise, naked, sharp. Last time was easy. I played it again. Pop didn't even fight it. I looked at the file name. I sat back in my chair. The darkness of the garage seemed to press in on me, but I didn't feel small anymore. For 4 weeks I had been operating on defense. I was trying to save my house. I was trying to save my pension. I was trying to prove I wasn't incompetent. That was over. This wasn't about guardianship anymore. This was a homicide investigation in reverse. She had killed Earl Langston, maybe not with a gun, maybe not with poison, but with neglect and isolation and a stolen will. And she was in the middle of doing the exact same thing to me. I wasn't the victim. I was the undercover wire. I looked at the boxes of equipment in the corner, the tools of my trade. I had spent 40 years cleaning up audio-making voices sound better than they were. Now I was going to do the opposite. I was going to make sure everyone heard exactly who she was. I clicked save. I backed the file up to the thumb drive. I backed it up to the cloud. Then I went to sleep. And for the first time since the heart attack, I slept without dreaming. I had work to do in the morning. The official declaration of war arrived on a Monday. It came in a manila envelope delivered by a bored-looking process server who smelled of cigarette smoke. I signed for it on the front porch. The wind whipped the bare branches of the oak tree in the yard a sound like rattling bones. Brett was home. Deanna had made sure of that. She was, coincidentally, working late. Brett stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He handed me the papers after the server left. His own hands were shaking. Dad, Deanna says this is just to protect you, he said, not meeting my eyes. For your finances and stuff. She says it is standard procedure. I took the envelope from him. The paper was thick, important. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it was. I walked past him and went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and read every word. The legal language was cold, precise, and full of lies. Respondent demonstrates diminished capacity, unable to manage his own health and financial affairs. Petitioner has provided consistent and loving care. They had set the hearing for 3 weeks from today. I picked up my phone and called Arlo. My voice was calm when I spoke. The furnace of my anger was burning too hot to produce smoke. They filed, I said. Hearing is in 3 weeks. Good, Arlo's voice came back a low rumble. Let her think she is winning. We file our response on the deadline, not a day before. We give her no time to prepare for what is coming. I hung up. I folded the papers and placed them on my nightstand. The first shot had been fired. Now it was my turn to listen for the echo. Deanna's victory lap lasted all week. She floated through the house humming. She was relaxed, expansive, drunk on the belief that she had already won. Her confidence made her careless. Wednesday night, she made her first mistake. She came home from work, dropped her purse on the kitchen island, and went to take a shower. The purse, the big overstuffed leather one she carried everywhere, was a Chekhov's gun. I'd been watching for weeks. It landed with a heavy thud and it fell open. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. From my chair in the shared open space of the kitchen and dining area, I had a clear line of sight into the bag. I didn't move. I didn't touch it. I just looked. There was the usual clutter, a wallet, keys, a half-eaten protein bar. But on top, I saw it. The corner of a manila folder with the words, "Pruitt, legal," written on the tab. Sticking out of that folder was the corner of my own Social Security card. She was carrying my identity in her purse like a trophy. And next to the folder, a business card. The logo was a stylized, comforting tree. Autumn Ridge, Senior Living. Schedule your tour today. She was already shopping for my cage. I heard the water in the master bathroom shut off. I looked down into my teacup. I focused on the steam rising in lazy curls. I did not move. A few minutes later, she walked back into the kitchen, a towel wrapped around her wet hair. The air filled with the scent of her shampoo and that ever-present vanilla body spray. "Oh," she said, seeing the open purse. "I just threw this down. Sorry, Dad, just some work stuff." She grabbed the bag and zipped it shut. The sound of the zipper teeth grinding together was harsh final. "No problem, sweetheart," I said. She smiled at me, the practiced 440 hertz smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Deanna," I said. She turned her hand on the purse strap. "You have a good heart," I said. The words landed. I watched them hit her. She blinked. For a tenth of a second, something flickered across her face. It wasn't guilt, it was surprise. The pure animal surprise of a predator being called gentle by its prey. She recovered instantly. The smile snapped back into place. "Honestly," she said, "I just want what is best for this family." There it was. Number 24. I'd been counting. The close call happened the next day, Thursday afternoon. Deanna came home early. I was sitting at the kitchen table methodically cleaning my hearing aids with a small brush. My laptop was in my room on my desk. It was open. The audio editing software was on the screen, showing a neat row of labeled recordings. Deanna walked past me carrying a basket of clean laundry. "Just bringing you your shirts, Dad," she said. But she didn't just drop the basket. I heard her footsteps continue into my room. A moment later, I heard the distinctive low-frequency creak of the third floorboard inside the doorway. It was a sound I had cataloged. It was the sound of someone snooping, not just passing through. I put down the cleaning brush. I stood up slowly, making a small groan as I straightened my back. I shuffled down the hallway. I found her standing in the middle of my room. The laundry basket was in her hands, but her eyes were sweeping the space, taking inventory. Her gaze lingered on the stack of old equipment boxes in the corner. "Just bringing your shirts, Dad," she said again. "Thank you," I said. I looked past her. At my desk, at the laptop, the screen was dark. A small box in the center of the screen read, "Enter password." It had auto-locked. I had set the timeout to 60 seconds, a habit I had picked up from my years with the police department. You never leave a screen open, ever. Deanna's eyes drifted to the laptop, then back to the boxes. "You know," she said, "we should really clear some of this old radio stuff out. We could donate it. Goodwill would take it." I stood very still. I looked at the boxes filled with the tools of my salvation. "I like having it around," I said. My voice was even. "Reminds me of Della. She used to visit me at the station. I had never used Della's name as a shield before. It felt like a violation. But it worked." Deanna's face tightened with annoyance, a micro-expression that was gone as quickly as it appeared. She forced another smile. "Sure, Dad, whatever makes you happy." She put the laundry on my bed and walked out. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was hammering against my ribs. 1 minute. If she had come home 1 minute earlier, she would have seen it all. The files, the waveforms, the name, Earl Langston. That night, I added a second password to the laptop, then a third. From then on, whenever I wasn't using it, I kept it tucked under my mattress, cold and hard against the springs. The house was no longer a recording studio. It was a war zone. Saturday night, week 5, all is lost. I was on the sofa in the living room. The TV was on a nature documentary about lions. I wasn't watching it. The recorder was running in my pocket. The microphone was live. My body was in the living room, but my ears were in the kitchen. Deanna and Brett were at the kitchen table. The overhead light cast a harsh clinical glare on them. It looked like an operating theater. In a way it was. They were performing a dissection of my life. Deanna had a yellow legal pad in front of her. She was coaching him. Her voice was rhythmic, repetitive, like a metronome drilling a pattern into his brain. "Say it again," she commanded. From the top. Brett's voice was a monotone. He was reciting, not speaking. "My father has shown signs of confusion for the past several months. He forgets to take his medication. He talks to recordings of my mother. He wanders the house at odd hours." "Night?" Deanna interrupted. "Say it night. It sounds worse. Wanders the house at night," Brett corrected himself. "I'm concerned about his ability to manage his own affairs." Deanna's pen tapped the pad. Tap, tap, tap. Good. Now, the part about the heart attack. Brett hesitated. His hands resting on the table began their nervous dance fingers twisting over each other. "My father's heart attack was a result of his own negligence in managing his medication." Add the word sadly, Deanna instructed, her voice soft, instructive. "Judges love sad sons." "My father's heart attack was sadly a result of his own negligence," Brett repeated. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "Perfect." Deanna purred. Are we sure about this?" Brett asked. His voice was small. A flicker of the boy I remembered. Deanna's head snapped up. Her voice turned sharp as broken glass. "Are we sure, Brett? Your father nearly died because he cannot take care of himself. What do you think happens next time? Do you want to be the one to find him? He seems fine to me sometimes," Brett mumbled. Deanna's tone shifted again. It became a soft, warm syrup of manipulation. "Baby," she said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. "That is the disease. That is what is so cruel about it. Lucid moments do not mean he is lucid. It means he is having a good hour. Trust me, this is what is best for him. This is the only way to keep him safe." Brett's hand stopped ringing under hers. He nodded. "Okay," he said. From the top, Deanna said, pulling her hand back. I sat on the sofa. I listened to my son, my only child. I listened to him rehearse the lies that would strip me of my home, my autonomy, my name. The same voice that once shouted, "Dad, I can hear the whole world," was now being tuned and sculpted to destroy mine. I had expected Deanna's cruelty. She was a predator. Predators hunt. It is what they do. But this sound, the sound of my son's surrender, the flat obedience in his voice, as he said, "Okay," was a frequency of grief I had never known. He wasn't evil. He was captured. He was a signal buried so deep in noise that he no longer remembered his own sound. And in 2 weeks, he was going to walk into a courtroom and perform a script written by his captor, and he was going to believe he was helping me. The question was no longer whether I could win. I had the evidence. I had the recordings. I knew I could win. The real question was what would be left of my son when I did. Later that night, I drove to a gas station on the edge of town. I stood by the air pump under the buzzing fluorescent lights and called Arlo. "She is coaching him," I said. "I have the recording. That is good evidence," Norm Arlo said. "That is dynamite. That is my son Arlo." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the wind whistling past the phone. "I know," Arlo said finally. His voice was heavy. "That is why we have to win." Sleep was a country I could no longer visit. I sat on the edge of my bed in the 2 a.m. darkness of the garage. The house was a dead frequency zone, the only sound the low 120 hertz hum of the furnace kicking on in the basement. I had no equipment on, no headphones, no recorder running. There was nothing left to capture but the static inside my own head. I kept replaying the last recording. Not Deanna's voice, I was immune to that now. It was Brett's. The flat, rehearsed monotone as he recited the words she had fed him. The sound of his surrender, the way he said, "Okay," when she told him this was for the best. That was the sound that was breaking me. For 5 weeks, I had been the hero of my own story. The quiet man fighting back, the sound engineer building a case. But what if I was just another kind of liar? I had been recording my family in secret. I had been performing the role of a confused old man. I was manipulating perception, just like she was, only my tools were microphones and equalizers instead of fake concern and gaslighting. I was building a weapon to destroy my son's life to save my own. Even if I won, what would Brett become? The man who finds out his wife is a predator, who tried to kill his father. The son who sat in a courtroom and testified against that same father, only to be proven a fool. Either way, he was destroyed. The foundation of his life would turn to dust. Maybe the best thing to do was to just let it go. I could pack a bag, I could walk out the door before the sun came up, I could find a small apartment on the other side of town. Let Deanna have the house, let her have the money. It was just paper, it was just wood and nails. In time, maybe Brett and I could find our way back to each other. Maybe if I sacrificed everything, I could salvage that one last thing. I picked up my phone. The screen cast a cold blue light on my hands. I looked at Arlo's number. I could call him, tell him to drop the counter petition. I could tell him I was done. My thumb hovered over the call button. I couldn't do it. I swiped over to my photos instead. I found the picture that lived on the refrigerator door, Brett, age 8, sitting on my lap in the main studio at WLFI. He was wearing my huge headphones, his eyes wide with wonder, a gap-toothed smile on his face. The memory was so clear I could smell the ozone from the tape machines. Della, I whispered into the darkness, what would you do? You always heard me even when I wasn't speaking. I need to hear you now. The silence that answered was absolute. It was the loneliest frequency of all. My hand moved on its own. It reached for the old Sony cassette player on my nightstand. I picked it up. The plastic was cool, worn smooth from years of use. It felt like a part of my own body. I pressed the eject button. The door opened with a soft mechanical sigh. I took out the tape. Della's tape. The one I hadn't listened to since the heart attack. I had been afraid to. I was afraid that hearing her voice so full of life would shatter the cold professional shell I had built around myself, but it was 2:30 in the morning and the shell was already cracking. I put the tape back in and pressed play. The familiar click and whir of the mechanism was a sound from another lifetime, then the hiss of magnetic particles rushing past a playhead. Her voice filled the small room singing that old Roy Orbison song, Blue Bayou, slightly off-key, full of sunlight and pancake batter. The recording was full of life, the clatter of a fork, the hiss of the gas stove, the shuffle of her slippers on the linoleum floor. It was the sound of a woman who didn't know she was being preserved for a future she would never see. My chest ached with a grief so sharp it felt like the heart attack was starting all over again. The song finished. There were 10 seconds of silence, then the sound of her humming something else too quiet to identify, and then another voice. Brett. He was 22, home from college for the weekend. His voice was higher, then clearer, not yet thickened with the compromises of adult life. "Mom, you sound so happy," he said on the tape. Della laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "I am happy, baby," she answered. "Your father gave me the best gift this morning." "What was that?" Brett asked. Della's recorded voice spoke the words that changed everything. "He listened to me, really listened. Do you know how rare that is? A man who actually hears you?" The tape hissed for a few more seconds, and then the recording ended. I sat in the dark. The words echoed in the silence of the garage. A man who actually hears you. That was what she valued. Not my paycheck from the station, not the promotions I never got. She valued the one thing I knew how to do better than anyone else. I knew how to listen. And in that moment, sitting in a cold garage with a laptop full of lies and a broken heart, I finally understood what I had to do. This wasn't about destroying Deanna. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making Brett hear. Not my words, not my accusations. I had to make him hear the truth in the one voice he might still believe hers. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a fighter. I was a sound engineer. My entire life, my one job had been to take a messy, noisy, complicated signal and make it clean. To make the important voices clear so the audience could hear what mattered. I had one more show to produce. I sat up straight. I wiped my face on the sleeve of my shirt. I turned on my laptop. The screen glowed. I opened the audio files. All 23 of them. I started dragging them into the editing software, lining them up on the timeline. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was building a narrative. I was crafting a broadcast. This one wasn't for the radio. This one was for an audience of one. A son who needed to hear his wife's real voice for the first time, and a judge who was going to be sitting in the front row. At 6 o'clock in the morning, as the first gray light began to filter through the garage window, I called Willa. "I need your studio," I said. Today, all day. Her voice was thick with sleep, but she didn't hesitate. What are we building? A broadcast, I said. The last one of my career. I will make the coffee, she said, and hung up. For the next week, Willa's studio became my entire world. We worked in long, silent shifts fueled by black coffee and a shared, unspoken rage. I sat at the mixing console, my hands moving over the sliders and knobs with an intimacy born of 40 years of practice. This was my craft. This was my church. I took Deanna's voice and I put it under a microscope. I surgically removed the sound of Brett's snoring. I used a de-esser to soften the harsh sibilance of her lies. I used a noise gate to create stark dramatic silences between her sentences. I took every recording where she said the word honestly and edited them together into a brutal percussive supercut. Honestly, 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 each one a hammer blow. Willa worked on the visuals. She took my phone pictures and cleaned them up. She blew up the image of the guardianship petition, highlighting the date in red. She found a clear, smiling photo of Earl Langston from an old church directory and placed it side by side with his obituary. Arlo came by on the final day. He watched the full 12-minute presentation on the studio monitor without a word. When it was over, he just nodded. That will do, he said. We rendered the final file, a single video file on a thumb drive, 12 minutes long, the length of a radio news segment. It was the story of a man being erased, and it was told entirely in the voice of the woman holding the eraser. The work was done. The broadcast was ready. All that was left was to find a stage. The morning of the hearing, I woke up on Willa's sofa. The apartment smelled of coffee and newsprint. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the weight of the day settled on me, a physical pressure in my chest. Willa had made breakfast eggs and toast, but I couldn't eat. The food sat on the plate like a prop. I drank the coffee, black and bitter. I stood in front of the mirror in her small bathroom and straightened the knot of my tie. I was wearing the suit Della had bought me for our 40th anniversary, dark navy wool. I had only worn it once to her funeral. The faint scent of mothballs clung to the fabric, a smell like preserved time. I took the hearing aids from their case. I picked them up, the small plastic shells cool against my fingertips. I settled them in my ears, a familiar routine. The world snapped into focus, the hiss of the radiator, the distant groan of a garbage truck. Then, with a slow, deliberate press of my thumb, I turned them both off. I didn't need amplification today. Today, the world was going to hear me. Willa drove. The car was quiet as we crossed the Wabash River, the water a sheet of dull gray steel under the February sky. You ready, Norm? She asked, not taking her eyes off the road. 40 years of sound checks, I said. One more. She glanced at me, a quick, fierce look. Della would be so proud. I looked out the window at the flat, frozen fields of Indiana. She would be furious, I said, then proud, in that order. The courtroom was exactly as I remembered it from my flash forward. It was the same stage, but the actors were different now. I was different. The fluorescent lights still hummed at 60 hertz. Deanna still wore the navy blazer, the tag still tucked inside the collar. Brett still sat beside her in his Ford polo shirt. Deanna's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a loving daughter-in-law burdened by a confused, declining father. He used words like erratic and incapable. He spoke of my self-neglect that led to the heart attack. Then he called his only witness, Brett Pruitt. My son made the slow walk to the witness box. He moved like a man walking through deep water. His hand, when he placed it on the Bible, was trembling. He sat down. He put his hands in his pockets, hiding them from view. He began to speak. The words came out flat, hollow, devoid of any frequency that sounded like my son. He was a playback machine, reciting a corrupted file. My father has shown signs of confusion for the past several months. He said, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. He wanders the house at night. He recited the lies she had written for him, word for word. He told the court that I forgot my medication. He told them I talked to recordings of my dead wife. And then he delivered the final polished line. His heart attack was sadly a result of his own negligence. I watched him. I did not flinch. I didn't look away. I just listened to sound engineer monitoring a broken signal. Arlo stood up. His cross-examination was short, quiet. A surgeon making a single, precise incision. Mr. Pruitt, he asked, who wrote those words you just said? Brett blinked. What those specific words, Arlo repeated. Sadly a result of his own negligence. Who composed that sentence? Brett's eyes flickered toward Deanna. Her expression was a mask of stone. They are my words, Brett said. I see, Arlo said. We will revisit that. No further questions. Arlo turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time we would like to present our evidence. It is an audio-visual compilation 12 minutes in length. Judge Frick nodded to the bailiff. The large screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life. The first thing the court heard was not my voice. It was Deanna's, crystal clear, captured in high fidelity from 12 feet away in an open-plan kitchen. Once I am his legal guardian, I control everything. The pension, the Social Security, the house. Deanna's face went rigid. She whispered something to her lawyer, who shook his head helpless. The second audio clip played. Brett does not fight anything. That is why I married him. I watched my son. He turned his head slowly and looked at his wife. His hands, which had been hidden in his pockets, came out. They were not ringing. They lay flat on his thighs, as still as stones. Then came the third recording. The coaching session. The court heard Deanna's voice, first sharp and instructive. Add the word sadly. Judges love sad sons. And then they heard Brett's voice repeating the exact words he had just testified to under oath. My father's heart attack was sadly a result of his own negligence. A ripple of sound went through the courtroom, a collective intake of breath. Judge Frick took off her reading glasses. She placed them on the bench with a quiet, deliberate click. Deanna's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this is an invasion of privacy. The evidence was admitted, the judge said without looking at him. Let it play. And then came the final clip, the one I had saved for last. Deanna's voice low and conspiratorial from a late Friday night. Last time was easy. Pop didn't even fight it. On the screen, the smiling face of Earl Langston appeared, followed by his obituary, the date of death, the letter from the lawyer about the sale of his house. The video ended. The screen went black. For 5 full seconds, the only sound in the room was the 60 hertz hum of the lights. Deanna shot to her feet. Her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she shook him off. That is taken out of context. She shouted, her voice shrill, the frequency spiking into the red. He was spying on me. He recorded me in my own home, Your Honor, Arlo said calmly. Mr. Pruitt is a resident of the household. He was physically present in the same shared living space during every recording. Indiana Code 35-33.5-5-5 one-party consent. Every recording was legally obtained. He is crazy, Deanna screamed. He is a crazy old man who Mrs. Pruitt. Judge Frick's voice cut through the air like a blade. Sit down. Deanna didn't sit. She spun around and faced Brett, her face contorted. Her final desperate instinct was to attack. Brett, tell them your father is confused. Tell them I was just trying to help. Tell them. Brett looked at her. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. The noise, the static, the years of her overwhelming signal finally fell away. You said gasp, loser, he said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the courtroom. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than I had ever recorded. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of truth. On the kitchen floor, Brett continued, his voice breaking. My father was dying, and you said gasp, loser, and I didn't. He covered his face with his hands. I did not do anything. That was the sound, the signal I had been listening for all along. My son's voice breaking through the noise. It was still there. After all this time, it was still there. Judge Frick's ruling was swift. The petition for guardianship was denied with prejudice. The matter of financial exploitation was referred to Adult Protective Services for immediate investigation. And Deanna's statements regarding Earl Langston were referred to the Vigo County Prosecutor's Office for review. It was over. The courtroom emptied out, the shuffling footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Deanna was gone. Her lawyer had hustled her out a side door. Her heels had clicked fast on the marble, a retreating frequency, the amplitude diminishing with every step. Arlo shook my hand. I will handle the APS filing and coordinate with Vigo County. You go home, Norm. You're home. It always was. Willa was standing behind me. She put a hand on my shoulder, a steady, warm pressure. I looked across the empty courtroom. Brett was still there. He was standing alone in the aisle, 30 feet of polished marble between a father and his son. He hadn't moved. I walked toward him. I walked slowly, not because my heart was weak, but because some distances must be crossed with care. I stopped 5 feet away. I could hear his breathing. It was ragged, 22 breaths per minute. Panic rate. Dad, he whispered. I did not know. I know I said. She told me you were. She said I know what she said. On the floor, he choked out the words. You were on the floor, and I just... His voice fragmented, breaking into frequencies of grief I had never cataloged because they were too close to my own. How do you even look at me? I took one more step. I was close enough now to see the shame in his eyes. Because I have spent 67 years listening, I said, and right now I'm hearing my son for the first time in 2 years. He broke then. Not a loud, dramatic collapse. It was a quiet folding inward, his shoulders slumping, his head dropping. The sound he made was raw, the sound of a foundation crumbling from the inside. I reached out and put my hand on his head, my fingers in his hair the way I used to when he was a boy and afraid of thunderstorms. I just held him. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness is a frequency that takes time to tune, but it was presence, the presence of a father who hears his son even when the son has nothing left to say. Later on the courthouse steps, the February air felt clean on my face. There was no vanilla in it, no body spray, just the smell of Indiana winter. Willa's car was waiting at the curb. Brett walked to his own car alone. He would go home to an empty house. The realignment of our lives had already begun. I stood on the top step and looked out over Lafayette. In the distance, I could see the red blinking light of the WLFY radio tower, my old station. Still broadcasting, still sending signals out into the air, waiting for someone to listen. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the hearing aids. I held them in the palm of my hand, the small plastic shells looking insignificant against the lines of my skin. I looked at them for a long moment, then I closed my hand around them and slipped them back into my pocket, not into my ears. The air was cold. The morning was quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need any amplification to hear the world clearly. Norm's story reminds us of a powerful truth. In every family, there are frequencies we learn to tune out: the quiet person in the corner, the sigh that says more than words ever could. We treat them like background noise, forgetting that the quietest people are often the most observant. The most dangerous truths are not shouted. They are whispered when someone is sure you cannot hear. It makes you wonder who is the quietest person in your family, and what truths do you think they have silently collected over the years? Have you ever had that chilling moment when you caught the truth in a casual remark because someone underestimated what you could hear? Tell us your story, because as Norm proved, sometimes the greatest power isn't in speaking, but in finally making others listen.